You get 30 years nobody planned for. Your last kid moves out and your body just keeps going. A male Antechinus, a mouse-sized marsupial in Australia, gets about 2 weeks. He mates for 14 hours at a stretch. His immune system collapses, and he dies before his own kids are born. Salmon do a version of this. So do octopuses. Not one of them is worn out. Something inside them flips a switch and shuts the body down on purpose. So why does almost every animal on Earth have a death switch wired to reproduction? And why does yours seem to be missing? Here's the answer up front before we earn it. It's hormones. In animals that breed once and then die, reproduction triggers a chemical cascade the body never switches off, and the tissue damage finishes the job. Biologists call the strategy Semelparity, a word Lamont Cole put into print in 1954. Breed once. Exit. We're going to call the mechanism the death switch, because that's the honest description of what it does. Your body is running a different program, and nobody mentioned that in high school biology. The reason yours is different turns out to be stranger than the reason theirs isn't. Evolution does not fund retirement. Start with the Antechinus, because it's the most efficient version of the shutdown order anyone has found. Diana Fisher at the University of Queensland published the explanation in PNAS in 2013, and the short version is sperm competition. Every female mates with multiple males inside a season that lasts 1 to 3 weeks. So the male who spends everything in one window outfathers the male who paces himself, and there is no second season to save anything for. His cortisol stays jammed at maximum. That strips protein out of his own muscle to pay for the effort, and cortisol held that high shuts down immunity completely. Parasites move in. Internal bleeding starts. He's dead before the litter arrives. And that's the same hormone your body dumps into your blood at 3 a.m. when you remember an email you didn't send. Yours has an off switch. His was deleted on purpose. Pacific salmon run the same order on a much bigger body, and all 5 North American species of them run it. After spawning, a corticosteroid surge floods the tissue and the breakdown is fast. Most are dead inside 2 weeks. Immune function collapses. Organs start failing. The flesh degrades while the fish is still alive in the water. Fungus taking hold on a body that quit defending itself days ago. And this is not what being tired looks like. The trip upstream is brutal, sure, but the damage is chemical. It arrives on a schedule, and it arrives whether the river was long or short. Your body runs a much gentler draft of this every time you're stressed for a month straight and your skin and sleep both give out. Same hormone family, very different dosage. Evolution does not fund retirement. And here's where it gets stupid. You've probably heard that a mother octopus starves herself to death out of devotion, guarding her eggs until she wastes away, and that salmon simply swim themselves to exhaustion. Both of those are wrong. The devotion isn't causing the death. A pair of small glands behind her eyes is. In 1977, Jerome Wodinsky at Brandeis University ran the experiment that settled it. He surgically removed the optic glands from brooding females. They abandoned the eggs, started eating again, and lived for months longer. Not devotion, wiring. In 2022, Wang and Clifton Ragsdale at the University of Chicago published in Current Biology what the gland is actually doing. Once the eggs are laid, it flips its steroid and cholesterol output, and that flip is the shutdown order. So the salmon isn't exhausted and the octopus isn't grieving. We believed the sacrifice version because it's the story we'd want told about our own mothers, and a gland doing paperwork is a worse eulogy. But that can't be the full answer. Because if the whole thing runs off one gland, why would selection bother installing it at all? Look at the Mayfly for the cleanest version of the logic. An adult Mayfly has no functional mouthparts. Not weak ones. None. It cannot eat because the body it grew was never built to process a second meal. It was built to fly, mate, and stop. The adult female of one species, Delania americana, is done in under 5 minutes. Every calorie a parent burns staying alive after breeding is a calorie not spent on the breeding itself, and when there's no realistic second season, survival becomes a rounding error. Selection is happy to delete. That's the 2-week contract. One shot, fully funded, no extension, no appeal. Your body kept its mouthparts, and that was not a small decision. Evolution does not fund retirement, but that can't be the full answer. Because by that math, you should have the contract too. You're an animal with a fertility window, and yours closes decades before the rest of you does. A human female stops reproducing around 50, and routinely lives another 30 years. 30 years of a body that eats, sleeps, takes up shelter, and produces 0 additional children. On the ledger evolution keeps, that's a line item nobody gets to explain away as an accident. In 1998, Kristen Hawkes at the University of Utah named the leading explanation after years of watching Hadza foragers in Tanzania. Grandmothers. Older women dig up more food than they eat, the surplus goes to grandchildren, and their daughters can have the next kids sooner. Your extra decades aren't leftover life. They're an assignment. And almost nothing else on Earth got the same assignment. Menopause has been documented in humans plus 5 toothed whales. Killer whales, short-finned pilot whales, narwhals, belugas, false killer whales. One wild chimpanzee population appears to do it too. That's close to the whole list. Darren Croft and Lauren Brent at the University of Exeter worked out what the post-reproductive killer whale matriarchs do with the extra time. In years when salmon are scarce, the pod follows the old females, because they've watched a run fail before and they remember which channel still had fish in it. One 80-year-old female who remembers a bad decade is worth more to that pod than one more calf, which is exactly what your grandmother is doing when she tells you the same story for the 4th time. That memory is the only argument that has ever beaten the death switch. Evolution does not fund retirement. It funds a librarian. So the switch isn't missing from you, it got outbid. Every other animal in this video is worth more to its own genes dead than fed. And the arithmetic isn't close. We're one of the only species where the old version of you keeps earning, not through your own kids, but through theirs, and through the fact that somebody in the group still remembers the bad year. Nobody funded that. It got funded anyway, which is the closest thing our species has to a 401k. Your grandmother isn't a rounding error. She's infrastructure. And every unfunded decade you're walking toward was paid for in advance by somebody who refused to be a 2-week contract.